Hey everyone, welcome to the Process Mapping Masterclass. Today is April 11th, 2024, and this is our fourth episode for this year. My name is Meherban. I'm your host for this session, and I've got with me my lovely co-host Chanel. So Chanel, before we get started, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Big Bolovinaka from Fiji. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Chanel Nabunisaravi. I come with nearly 2 years, 20 years. My gosh, it sounds like a big number, but yeah, almost 20 years of experience with process mapping. And I can tell you I've worn a bit of hats in process management, project management, you name it, analytics. But hey, who stops learning after 20 years, right? Keeps going. So I'm very passionate to be learning and sharing knowledge with you here on this platform. Thanks to Meherban for creating the platform. So let's take advantage of this webinar and bring out ideas and comments. Look forward to the session. Thanks, Meherban.
Thanks, Chanel. So, for those of you who don't know me, once again, my name is Meherban Farouk. I'm the founder and principal of BPS Partners, which I started in 2017, essentially to help my clients implement business process management. And again, for those of you who are new to business process management, or BPM as we refer to it, hopefully beginning to understand the value proposition that it offers, not just for the leadership team, the C-suite and the management team, but all the way down to the shop floor across the organization. So what you see essentially is, you know, the BPM framework that I've built up over the years, right? And again, I've been doing this like Chanel, I've been doing it for 20 years. And thanks to my experience at Enbridge, I mean, essentially I started documenting process maps. But as I kept doing one project after another, one process after another, as I started getting onto ERP implementations, SAP, and then Oracle, and then Maximo, and then as I started my own consulting, I started realizing that, of course, it's a little bit more than just process documentation. I see myself as the right hand of a chief operating officer or a CFO or a CIO, somewhere up there, who wants to genuinely improve the way the work is performed in and across the organization. Right? It's not just about one process map. It's about the entire organization, right? So when you talk about the entire
Yeah.
organization, which is what BPM is all about, technically your process has to tie to strategy. And when I say strategy, I mean strategic objectives. So I'll get to that in a second. So that's kind of what we do. If you don't want to reach out to me for any additional coaching or consulting, my coordinates on the left, email, my LinkedIn, my contacts. You can also view these YouTube videos that I put up on my channel, which is at BPS Partners. So last week, last weekend, I wrote this LinkedIn article, essentially explaining how I implement BPM across the organizations, across my clients, where I connect what I refer to as organizational assets, people, process, technology, risk, and performance, with, for lack of a better term, I call it aspirational goals. So if you think about strategy, or if you think about your core values and culture and vision and purpose and strategy, these are the aspirations in my mind that a leadership team wants to achieve. And the way you achieve them, the common thread, and maybe I'm biased, but the common thread in my head is process. And process connects to technology, people, risk, and performance, right? KPIs. So that's kind of what and I got some pretty good feedback. People were reaching out to me on LinkedIn asking how I do it. So I thought I'd dedicate the session today to explain how I do it, right? At a high level, I would break the session into two segments. I would call it strategic alignment. I'll explain to you how it all aligns strategically. And then I would like to explain tactically how I do it, right? So it's one thing to have theory and strategy, right, Shana? But it's a whole other
Yeah.
thing. Like, we read all these books and we see all these videos. But end of the day, if you're about to start a project, what's your first step? How do you start? Tactically, how do you start it on the ground? So that's kind of what I want to explain. Shannon, before I go into detail, any thoughts, any points you want to make, or?
Without going too much into detail, I think it's an exciting opportunity for everybody online or in the class today to see how everything links from what we've been doing for the past 3-4 sessions to how we can start getting active in terms of the BPM framework or processes involved in it. So yeah, carry on.
Thanks. Okay, so I'll start with the strategic alignment. So again, just to step back, I think it's important to understand. So these are words that we throw at times: people, process, technology, risk management, performance management, strategy, vision, purpose. And I find at times people are kind of confused. It may sound a little bit out there, like fluff words that don't mean much. So I thought it's important to explain first what each word means. So I'll start with the aspirational goal side, right? So when somebody says core values, what I take away, these are like your timeless principles, right? That like the founders of Walmart, the founders of McDonald's, the founders of whatever established, right? And it was passed down generations down to the current chairman and the CEO. Like these are timeless principles, whether they are of, you know, transparency or, collaboration. What are those principles are in few words, it's out there, right? You typically find that on, your corporate walls and newsletters, whatnot. These are your core values. Desired culture ties very closely to people, of course. So what is culture in any organization? Culture is our shared values, our shared behaviors, and our shared beliefs. And that ties to people. So when I talk about people on the left, this is your finance analyst, your guy in the field digging the ground, your logistics manager, your CEO, your shop floor operator, people across different divisions. So of course, when you talk about people, meaning Susan, Mary, John, Bob, Ali, right? These are individuals with their unique skills, their unique experiences, and unique perspectives that are working for a single organization that could be 10,000 people across 3 continents, if that makes sense, right? So when I talk about an organization that has 10,000 or 100,000 people across 3 continents, or 1 continent, doesn't matter, right? You as a leader, as a CEO, as a C-suite, you need to bring all of them together to be aligned to your core values, your corporate core values, the desired culture that you want to build, and not follow their own right or wrong core values and their own behaviors. And that's where the tying comes between people and culture. But that culture is driven from that higher level core values. If you go down to vision, vision is your North Star, as we typically say, right? That defines your ultimate destination. This is the primary purpose why you exist as an organization. Whether you're a manufacturing, whether you're an automotive, whether you're in oil and gas, whether you're in banking, whether you're me, whether you're a single solo consultant selling BPM services, right? But it's your typical North Star that defines your ultimate destination, and it's beyond profits. It's why you exist to serve the customers. I mean, that's the best way I can say it. It's why does Toyota exist to serve the customers, or why does Scotiabank exist? Why do you exist? What's your purpose? What's your core purpose? And it has to be very clear. That's what vision is. Right, and that feeds into your purpose. So vision is that aspirational statement that feeds into your purpose as a fundamental reason why we exist, just making profits. Now, once you, as an organization, and when I typically go into any organization, any new client, these things are figured out. I'm not typically the one. I'll be honest. I mean, I don't have the expertise to help them define core values and desired culture, vision, and purpose. I could do that, uh, probably, but when I go into organization, these things are typically well defined or in the process of being defined down to the strategy level. So the strategy is very clear, strategic objectives with strategic KPIs or scorecard that's based off that. So when I walk in to implement BPM for an organization, I've got these aspirational goals either very well defined or in the process of being defined, or I would do a workshop or two and I would have it defined. It would be there. So now, before I go on people, technology, risk, and performance, once again, what is process? Process is how we should be performing work, not how we are, quite frankly. So when I say How we are performing work is current state, if that makes sense. How we should be performing is that desired state. And that desired state, again, is coming from that leadership team based on the desired culture, the core values, the strategic objectives that they want to meet, the purpose that they want to. Make sense so far, Chanel?
Yeah,
Right?
definitely makes sense. Yeah.
Right. So now the question becomes, and this is what you see, what I have on the right side. But Meherban, how do you connect process to these high-level aspirational goals? These are guiding principles. So if you've been in any of these ERP implementation workshops, functional workshops, so typically you've got a system implementer, facilitating like a group of subject matter experts documenting process maps. You would see like on the wall, they would have typically, and I'm not sure if you've seen, but you would have them see guiding principles for the project. The project typically has a certain vision that they want to meet, certain benefits that they want to meet, right? So that would be listed as guiding principles. For me, it's the same thing. So when I'm starting a process workshop, and there's a lot more I do before I start a process workshop, which is something I'll discuss on the tactical execution side. I have understood the core values, desired culture, the vision, the purpose, the strategy based on documentation, based on meetings with the C-suite and the management, and down to the shop floor people, office people, to understand what's going on and what they want. And I would kind of uh, build those guiding principles that I would keep in handy as a handout for my workshops. If I'm doing online teams, I would have it handy. So when people get stuck on a process step, right, and they're wondering how to go about it, I would kind of pull that up. It's a guiding principle. And I said, this is what your leadership team wants. So that core customer facing process, or that supply chain process, or that inventory management process, this particular, do you think you're meeting that criteria or not? I'll pause there for a second, Chanel, and again, kind of, and I don't want to open up to everybody, but what do you think so far? Like these are your timeless principles, your very specific direction in the form of strategic objectives or management has given you that you should incorporate in your process. Make sense?
Absolutely. And I had mentioned this in the previous um, masterclass was when you're documenting a process, you're not just documenting a process in terms of this is what we're doing, but how do you connect it to the overall objective of where the business or your organization is heading towards when it comes to any implementation, ERP, CRM, whatever it is. Your processes need to align with that because it creates a behavior that allows your business to engage with culture, collaborate with each other to be able to execute them. Um, as you had mentioned, with all the aspirational goals for the business.
Perfect. Thanks, Chanel. So now hopefully that piece starts making sense. Now we talk about, and again, this is, if you've been on any system implementation or any project, you would hear people talk about people process technology. And yes, it's always about people process technology. And the way I've always been saying it for the last 20 years is you can have the best technology, the best SAP, the best Oracle, you can have the best system integrator implement it the best way for you. But if you haven't done proper change management, if you haven't engaged your people, I'm talking, whether it's 10,000 people getting impacted or 1,000 people getting impacted or 500 people getting impacted. If you haven't figured out who those people are, in which divisions, the level of impact that this new system or this new process is going to have on them, and you haven't, before you went live with it, if you haven't trained them enough, um, if you haven't done enough end user adoption or readiness exercises, then I won't say you're bound for failure, but it will not be a successful implementation as it deserves to be. And to me, that is failure. So we talk about, if you look at Gartner reports, they would say over 70% ERP implementations fail or business transformations fail. That's what failure means. That when you started going out for a system implementation or business transformation, you said, I want to achieve these 10 objectives, whatever those 10 objectives are, your vision. But if you don't end up achieving all 10, you achieve just 5, technically that's a failure because you didn't achieve those 10, if that makes sense, right? And a lot of times I've seen where you will go live, you'll force your organization to go live with a new system, and then unfortunately the organization will have to suffer the consequences, right? Because again, not a thorough job was done to identify the process, the business requirements, the change management, the communication, the training. So the organization wasn't ready. I've actually seen grown people cry on go live day, and it's very sad. Anyway, coming back to the point. So when you talk about technology, again, I've just thrown some stuff there, ERP systems like SAP, Oracle, or Microsoft Dynamics 365, CRMs like Salesforce, Tableau, Power BI for analytics, RPAs, even Excel. Even Excel, we may not realize is a system, it's a tool, right? So it's how you connect technology to process, and that's something I'll discuss on the tactical side. In my last class, I think it was March session, I went in a lot of detail talking about risk management and performance management, what I refer to as process risk and performance management, based on the COSO ERM framework. So that's essentially where you tie in the process objectives with the strategic objectives. And I have a slide where I talk about this a little bit more clearly in this session. But you identify the process objectives that are aligned to the strategic objectives. Then you define the process KPIs that help you measure the process objectives. Then you go through a comprehensive inherent risk assessment. In the absence of any controls, you assess it, and then you identify key controls, and then you figure out the residual risk. That's really what it is. So at a high level, this is how you tie in what I refer to as organizational assets with the aspirational goals, and the common thread between two of them is process on the asset side and strategy on the aspirational goals side. That's the way I see it. Um, okay, so starting with the first item, technology. So how do we align technology to strategy and process? Now, before I kind of go into the detail, and I know all of you kind of have heard this many times or have read this, but it's kind of good to put it on a slide, right? The pace at which technology is proceeding, is going ahead, is almost mind-boggling, if I may. And that's significantly improving the quality, the speed, the possibilities of what is possible today versus what was possible. Forget 20 years ago, 10 years ago, just like a year ago, right?
Yeah.
So you can imagine at that rate where we will be 3 years from now, 1 year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. I can't even see where we'll be 10 years from now, quite frankly, right? So that's what technology, so whether it's advanced AI that's breaking down communication barriers. I don't need to learn Chinese or French or Spanish anymore, right? I can use AI for that. When it
Yeah.
comes to machine learning, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, blockchain, quantum computing is solving complex problems millions of times faster than regular IoT devices. So that's the list. Now, this is something I feel that for organizations, you need to have a digital strategy, right? So as part of your overall corporate strategy, you need to have a digital. You can't just say now it's just it's the CIO's job. I think the pace at which we are growing technology, I think your entire leadership team, of course, the CIO and the IT team should be more involved, but the CEO, the CFO, they cannot leave it completely to the CIO. The leadership team has to be engaged as to what technologies are out there, what does it mean for their organization, what technologies that competition is using, what technologies should they be using, which technology should they be sunsetting. And I'm not just talking SAP and ERP. I'm not talking ERP and CRM tools. I'm talking all kinds of technologies out there. The list is in front of you. Um, and in my humble opinion, if the corporates don't have technology strategy figured out, now again, like any strategy or any plan, in my opinion, these are living documents. You can create a strategy, you can change it as you find more information, as a new technology comes out. You can of course change it. You don't have to get stuck to your digital strategy that you made 6 weeks ago, or 6 months ago, or 1 year ago. But you need to have a discipline as a leadership team. You need to have a disciplined approach where you discuss digital strategy as part of your regular briefings, whether it's monthly or quarterly, but you need to have a good eye on that. Um, and seamlessly integrating technology with process and strategy is the key to unlocking innovation and securing a future in digital age. And this is something what I do, right? So process is that common link. And once again, we never put the cart before the horse. So please, for those of you who have either experienced or are about to embark on ERP implementation, please take the time to think through your processes. Don't just depend on the vendor, the software vendor, SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, whoever, or the system integrator, Deloitte, PwC, KPMG, or mom and pop shop, whatever, to come in and tell you that this my software, SAP software, because that's what they will normally do, has the best practices, has all the processes in place. You don't have to worry about it. That's the wrong approach. It's your business. And I have a slide down the road where I kind of talk about Walmart or Coca-Cola or Amazon. Now these are giants, right? That have invented their businesses and the business processes. Can you imagine corporates like Amazon, Coke, or Walmart depending on an SAP or Oracle to tell them how they should run their business? Like, sounds silly, right? So why should you as an organization depend on any software vendor, no matter how big or small their name is, to tell you how to run your business process? You should take the time to figure out what your business process, and it takes time. Nothing is easy. Nothing of significance in life is easy, right? But you've got to invest that, because if you don't pay the price now, I promise you, you will pay the price later at go live, if that makes sense, right? So there's a reason why Gartner says 70% transformation, 70% plus ERP implementations fail, because people don't take the time upfront to understand how the current processes work, what are the pain points in the current processes, what are the improvement opportunities in the current processes, and then come up with the future state, right? How processes should be performing, right? And then take that information and build their business requirements, take those business requirements at a high level and create what you would call RFP or RFS, request for proposal, request for services, and then let the SAPs and the Oracles and the sales forces of the world come in, and or AIs or whatever, blockchain or quantum computing or IoT, whatever you want. Let them come, and then based on the requirements tell you we can do this or not. The other angle here, by the way, of the value add is when you do that homework of process documentation and high level, not detail, because detail comes later, high level business requirements for your RFS, then you have a robust contract, right? So when you engage an ERP vendor or a system integrator, because you know what you want of those business requirements in the RFS, RFP, that typically becomes part of your contract. Now, you don't want to ever call out that contract with a vendor, but if the time comes, you need to protect your liability, right? So keep
Yeah,
those things in mind. If that doesn't make sense, Shana?
absolutely.
Okay. So again, I just put some examples. Again, these are all known examples that, whether it's Blockbuster that lost to Netflix, or Kodak that, didn't pivot to digital photography, or Nokia that missed the smartphone revolution to Apple and Android, BlackBerry, Yahoo, Sears, Toys R Us, Circuit City, Xerox, taxis, to Uber and Lyft. These are all examples, right? In our current lifetime that you've seen last 10 years, I don't know, last 10 years, maybe 10, 15
Mhm.
years, that didn't adapt, didn't foresee the future. This goes back to my point about where your C-suite, the leadership team, should have digital strategy front and center, and not just depend on their CIO to do it on his or her own, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So, because if you do that, your competition is definitely keeping an eye on the technology going. Shannon, you have a thought?
Yeah. So just going back to the whole concept of having um, the process part, everyone needs to be involved. And I'm not saying every individual in the organization, but all the key people, if there's a digital implementation to plan out, need to be involved. This is where the cross collaboration part comes in, and to manage the change aspect of BPM and the processes. A lot of times I've had experiences in the past where you just work with this one team that's going to be looking after this one major project that's going to impact the whole organization, and it does fail. Not fail in the sense that you don't roll it out, but you keep revisiting after go live date, you keep making fixes after go, your implementation or project plan. So in order to block all of those risks, you need to engage all your key people to give their insights and feedback, because not everybody's going to put it on paper whenever you want it. You need to talk to them and probe them to give you the information to be able to make these systems requirements much more effective for developers. Yeah,
Thanks,
that's
Shannon. And to your point, this is why change management is so important. I mean, not just for a system implementation, but even for a BPM implementation. That can be done for ERP or in general, right?
yeah.
Change management is absolutely important. You need to understand who this process is touching, how much is it impacting. They need to be engaged. Thanks, Shannon.
Mhm.
So again, I'm not trying to teach you the ERP waterfall methodology. I'm just trying to make the point how technology is tied to process and strategy, if that makes sense, right?
Yes.
And I'm sure I missed a step or two here, but essentially, before you engage before forget engage, before you figure out what is the right software for you, you document your process, right? And as I've been saying, at the risk of repeating myself a million times, and apologize for that, you don't document a process map in isolation. You document the process keeping in mind what is your strategic objective that is tied to your core values, desired culture, vision, and purpose, right? And again, you think it through, you put it as guiding principles, you socialize those guiding principles with your BPM team, your process owners, your subject matter experts in the workshops, before you start documenting. But when you do a good job at facilitating and socializing it with the subject matter experts and BPM champions and process owners for that particular process or that initiative, good things happen, quite frankly. So that's kind of the first step. So once you document your process maps, the next step is that from those process maps, you're then able to, identify requirements at a high level, to create your request for services or request for proposal that you send out to vendors. And, that's how you get into figuring out. So whether it's SAP or Oracle, you get the presentations and you figure out what is the right one for you, who's the right system integrator. And then, I missed a lot of steps here. You do a budget, a board approval, those steps, the project starts, you start planning, but then you get to functional workshops. Now in the functional workshops, whatever process documentation you've done will be relooked at, of course, because now you've got a system integrator like SAP or Microsoft Dynamics or some AI tool you're implementing, or whether it's RP or whatever, they're looking at now your process maps, whether it's current state or future state, doesn't matter, but they're going to look at that and say, this is what the tool can do and this is what the tool cannot do. Now, this is why what I just said here, what the tool cannot do. This is why you need to do process documentation first. You need to do requirements gathering first. So those requirements gathering are in your RFS, right? Which the vendor has agreed to that they can meet. Now they're in your contract, because when it comes to the functional design workshop, see and maybe I'm going into too much detail, but the sales guys of these vendor companies are different than the functional execution team. Trust me on this. The sales people are there to make a sale, right? Like whether it's car sales or whether it's software sales, they're there to make sale. You need to protect your rights. So when you have done a comprehensive job uh, in the requirements gathering phase, that's part of the contract. When you're in the middle of a workshop, right, and that system integrator functional workshop lead says, oh, that requirement cannot be met, you should immediately challenge why not, because it was part of the RFS and you did agree, or your sales guy did agree that it'll be done. Anyway, too much detail, but that's how the workshops go. So you would look at those process maps again, you would look at those requirements again, and you would have very comprehensive business requirements um, into what we would call a business requirements document, BRD. That's what it ends up. And then once the BRD is done, of course, the technical team is kind of also in the workshop, not as much, but they're also in the workshops. And then they take away the BRD and turn it into a technical design document. And that technical design document is used to build the system. So I kind of highlighted those steps in blue for you to see how we go from process documentation to system build. And once the system, and that takes, depending on what the project is, if it's SAP, it can take a year to build the system. If it's some small software, it can take 3 weeks, whatever. But from system build, you're going to user acceptance testing. This is again where, because these testers are testers in the business, the same people that you engage in your process workshops to understand what the current state is, what their pain points is, what the improvement opportunities are. You build the future, process maps with them. You do the requirements gathering with them. Those are the same people, not all of them, but some of them you would use as testers to test now the new system. You see how it all connects? So when I talk about process map, I've used process map all the way through. from requirements using for requirements gathering to using in the functional workshops to change management and communication. Like, of course, I won't put the whole process map in our newsletter, but a few steps from there highlighted. I've used it definitely for training purposes. I've used it for UAT. There was a project I was working on, Chanel, where, I mean, we were rushing a little bit, so I'd done just enough process documentation. The system was good. Testing UAT started, right? And on day one, the testers were completely confused. It was a SAP enhancement. The testers
Yeah.
were completely confused. Like for 6 hours, they kind of kept going and it was like a chaos. So the project manager came back and said, listen, stop, timeout. He said, Meherban, come with me in the room. 3 days, we locked ourselves with a few people. I documented process maps as to what the future state is. And again, it's a very detailed process map that I did. Each step defined the new role, the step, the details, the SAP T code in the new, And once that was handed out, it took us 3 or 4 days. Once that was handed out, your UAT went like this. It just went like this. But that is again the value proposition of a process map, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can also call it like you can also refer to it like a common language when it comes to um, any level of implementation, whether it's executive to operator level, you still understand the process flow. You can understand how it goes. It's like a common language, or like I said, common denominator between anybody that's working on the same process or development. Yeah.
And I'm glad you used the word common language because there's again an opportunity for me to remind people not to go for BPMN. And again, I have nothing against BPMN. BPMN are a bunch of complicated symbols, flowchart symbols that good when you're, I guess, in a technical team and documenting a very technical system architecture diagram. I've never used BPMN in my 20 years, Chanel. I think you mentioned the same thing earlier
Yeah.
before. Most of the time when
I,
you're working with the C-suite or the shop floor or these, even ERP implementations, you don't want to use technical symbols. The last thing you want to do is when you share a process map, then teach them how to read that symbol. So common language is very
yeah.
important. That was a good catch there. Okay, so I hope this kind of helps you understand at a high level how you connect process. You start with process first, and how you document process based on strategy and desired culture, and then use that to build your system technology. Make sense? So I mentioned this earlier, so I won't repeat too much, but the point here is again that think of your Amazon, Coke, and Walmart would be if they depended on the SAPs and Oracles of the world to teach them how to, work their business processes. Okay, so the next point is about aligning people now. So this is the way I see it in my head, right? So as I said, people is tied to culture, and people are individuals. So again, back to my example of 10,000 people across 3 continents or 500 people in Toronto company, right? Irrespective, these individuals reside in operations, engineering, regulatory, logistics, administration, accounts payable, accounts receivable. I can keep going on, right? And they range across from all age brackets, all genders. So they have individual experiences in unique skills and perspectives, uh, which is good, right? This is what makes us all unique. But when you talk about a company has its own core values and desired culture. So how do you bring it together? In simple words, that's right. Now, what I've
Yeah.
seen again in my last 25, 30 years of working across different companies, uh, OCM, organizational change management, was not as popular. And now I'm seeing more and more trend, even on ERP projects, I mean, on ERP projects, I mean, I remember there was this first ERP implementation that was done in 96 or 97 at Enbridge. I wasn't there. And OCM was an afterthought. Organizational change management was literally an afterthought. In the last month, they brought somebody on and said, yeah, just conduct this training and let's go. The project failed. The project actually never went live. And in 2000, they learned from that experience. And in 2007, when they started ERP, and I was the OCM lead, and honestly, I didn't know much about OCM at that point, thanks to my team who were much more capable and competent than me, that taught me. But I really appreciate the value of OCM from having it from the very beginning during project planning phase, how you come up with the OCM strategy. But irrespective of ERP, when you want to change your organization culture, I believe you need to have a uh, clear-headed, robust, dynamic, empathetic change management team in your organization, reporting either to the CEO directly or the CEO, but at the C-suite level, right? Now, with due respect, I'm all for seeking qualifications and certifications and all, but there is practical experience that's required here. So I've seen a lot of Prosi certified folks who would, know all the terms, but had no experience of actually doing it. When you want to make an organizational change, you might want a blend of people who've done Prosi or some of these change management certifications. But you definitely want experienced hands, right, that have worked with people, and understand the fear factor, quite frankly. So
Mm.
change to me is the fear factor, and you need to kind of this is why for change management, your EQ or your emotional quotient, in my opinion, has to be higher than your IQ, quite frankly. Right? You need to understand the spoken and the unspoken words, the vibes. That's why when I'm doing Teams meetings, I'm always insisting that people should turn their cameras on. If they can't turn the mics on, that's fine, but I want the cameras on because I want to see what's going on and read the reactions. But anyways, coming back to the point, the the unique individuals make up your culture. As I already explained, core values feeds your. Now, when I talk about core value, I think a lot of it depends on leaders, quite frankly, right? So if I look at an organization of 10,000 or 1,000 people, whatever, just like our children follow the parents, correct? Uh, it's not just what we teach them and tell them, but they follow our actions because actions are louder than words, if that makes sense, right? If I say something and I do something else, it's more than likely that my child is going to follow what I do, not what I say, right? So likewise, at an organization, absolutely, we can have all these core values plastered over the walls and TV screens and newsletters, but the leaders need to follow it, embody it in spirit, not just in words. And when I say leaders, I'm not just referring to C-suite. I'm talking about the C-suite. I'm talking about the VPs. I'm talking about the directors, the senior managers, the managers, right? Because you can have the top layer follow it in spirit, and somebody down there at the operational level, but whatever, right? And guess what's going to happen to that team? Right? They will lose that. They will not believe in it, if that makes sense. So that's why it all ties in down to the process. So that's how you tie people to desired culture, strategy, and process. Make sense, Chanel?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So this is again something I discussed in detail in March, but I don't know if I had this graphic at that point in time. Uh, this is essentially how you connect risk management and performance management or scorecards. So this is how you connect ERM, enterprise risk management, and your balance scorecard at the enterprise level with your process level objectives, your process level KPIs, and your process level risks. Now, I'm not going to go into detail and talk about it because I already discussed it in the March session. You can go and take a look at it. You can pause the video and then when it's on YouTube and look at it later. But this is how, at a high level, on the left, you got your objectives and KPIs. On the right, you got your risks, and that's how it ties to your strategic ERM and strategy, right? Okay, and then once you figure out your controls at the process level, I've shown this many times since my classes in January. On the process map, I would typically have on the left a square numbered. That's the explanation, the details of the process step. And on the right, I would put in a circle number. That's a reference to the control, right? So the objective risk and control assessment, I would do it in Excel. But once I'm done and I figured out my 13, 14, 15, 20 controls, I'll just number them, put it into Visio, and then reference for the process step. Because visually, when I'm looking at the CEO or the shop floor, or a system implementer, I need, or an auditor, right? Internal or external. I need to understand the process map visually. I need to understand in a high level, in few words, verb noun format as a step. The details are in the details explanations, and then I need to understand if there's a particular control on that, whether it's a SOX control or a regulatory control or a safety control or a whatever control, right? That's how I refer it to the process step. So that's how it ties in. That's how risk management and performance management ties in. So that was a strategic alignment piece. Okay. So now I'll go into the tactical execution. So all this is, I don't want to call it theory, but all this is theory and great, good to know. How do you actually do it? Make sense? So this is back to my point. The day one, whether you have a new client or whether you're doing it at your own organization, how do you start? How do you go about it? The first thing, so I've got the steps kind of listed on the left. And again, there's a lot. So as I say, there's anything you do in life, there's a science and an art to doing it. What I'm teaching you, of course, is the science of doing it. And I'm sure I must have left a step or two. The art form, I'm trying my best to teach you. So when I say, you need to have the empathy, you need to have the emotional intelligence, those are the art forms that I'm talking about. Facilitation is the art form. Making sure people have their cameras on uh, on Teams so you can see them is the art form. There's no science to that, right? And that comes to experience. But what I'm about to share hopefully will help you understand how to go about it. And then, like anything else in life, once you start on that journey, and it's a journey, once you start on that journey, you will make some mistakes. You will not do it the right way. But if you keep going at it, you'll pick it up. And if you listen to this video a few more times, hopefully, this is what I do. When I read a good book, I keep it aside. I read after 6 months, or whether it's a podcast, if the one that I like. If I listen to it again, I pick up some nuances that I didn't pick up on the first time. Does that make sense, Chanel? I find
Yeah.
that happens with me all the time.
So yeah, human nature thing. I think you go through it exciting one
Yeah,
way, and then you go and revisit it, and you're like, that's what I missed out.
exactly. Okay, so when I start a new client, the first thing I do is do a process inventory, right? And this sounds very simple, but I promise you it is nothing close to simple. If the client, and in most clients that I go to, they don't have a ready-made process inventory, this is something I would do at the leadership level. So at the C-suite level or the management level, I don't want to do this with 20 people. It's typically done with 4 to 5 people at the leadership level who kind of know the business. And again, as I start building this list, of course, I will socialize it with their direct reports and their direct reports if required. But I find that typically less is more. So if you're doing it at a C-suite level with the right 5 or 6 people, they are able to kind of identify the key processes. So as I do this, this typically takes, you know, I don't know, depending on the size of your organization, can take 2 to 3 weeks. Of course, on
Yeah.
40 hours a week, but a few hours here and there, right? You kind of schedule a call, right, Chanel, where
Yeah.
kind of you bring it up and people are thinking. And first, I always find people kind of roll their eyes and go like, but then as they get used to it, right, stuff starts coming out. So then they go back to their teams
Mm.
and they figure out the process. And there's a lot of things that happens behind the scene. Of course, here is just the process name. But as I start writing the process name, I would also start capturing the process scope. What I also do
Mm.
at times, I don't have it here. I would write first step and last step, if that makes sense. First step and
Mm.
last step of the process. And this is what defines the boundaries of the process, right? The handover from assembly line management to quality control or supply, whatever it is, right? Um, and as they kind of think through the first step and the last step of the process name, it keeps changing. It's an interactive, and like anything, it's not in stone, but it's a good first starting point where I say, hey, define to me what is your core process. Core process typically are customer facing processes, right? Customer facing processes or regulatory compliance processes. Uh, and supporting processes are the ones that support that core process, their back office processes. Um, so yeah, so then I would identify the process owner in the process owner. I've said this many times before, I think, in my previous classes. But for the process owner, I'm looking for one person accountable for that end to end. And I'll tell you from my experience, it's very difficult to uh, get that point through at times. But as the leadership team starts appreciating the value of having one process owner and not two, not three, because see, a lot of these processes are end to end. They would start, from a marketing to a sales to a operations group, finance, finance group, and they would say, well, how can I be the process owner when it's across? And I would say, well, if you're doing most of the process and it's impacting you mostly, then you are the process owner. And this is something where you have to decide, right? Because if you
Yeah.
have more than one process owner, it's difficult to, there's no accountability, quite frankly, right? And then
Mhm.
decisions are made by committees, and that's not the right approach. Make sense, Sharon?
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, like just a sort of like a tip to anybody who's in the process of identifying your core and supporting processes within your organizations. I can understand through experience it can be very challenging to try and get them to understand or to highlight what they are or what the teams are, or forgive me, it can be challenging for the teams to identify what those core and supporting processes are because maybe they've never ever been asked to do that in the
Yeah.
past. But if I could ask or give some tips in terms of resilience, just keep doing what you're doing because eventually, when you start mapping that process out, whether it's a supporting process or a core process, you start to realize the appreciation from the various units in terms of how important those little tasks that they do support the overall process. So the importance of collaboration. I posted that up in my LinkedIn page this morning. It's so important for you to understand the correlation as to why you're doing things, as opposed to being a robot and just continuously processing. So once you, as the process mapping expert, starts to build that process together, you'll start to see a lot of the business units or individuals starts to appreciate why it's so important to have a business rule on turnaround times, or why there's an escalation point when it comes to a halt in this particular step. I mean, it's frustrating and probably the most frustrating process when it comes to the whole BPM process, but stick to your guns and keep doing what you need to do because the overall picture will become a Picasso by the time it's done and they'll appreciate it a little bit more than that blank canvas that you're trying to sketch to them. So that's just my input on that particular process of the BPM
Thanks, Sharon.
implementation.
And what I find when I'm doing this at the leadership level, it brings the leadership together. So we talk about leadership alignment
Mm,
and executive buy-in and alignment. This is, I don't want to say when the rubber hits the road because there's a lot more that comes later. But at this
mm,
stage, it starts sinking in, right? So typically when I go in, it's either CEO or the CEO or some CFO who wants BPM implemented across the organization. It's that pet project or desire, and not others are not completely bought in. But when we do this exercise, it starts becoming very real, right? And people challenge and people ask
mm,
and people say, why this process and why that process? Why am I the process owner? Why not Bob? And that those discussions kind of help to bring people along, if that makes sense, right? So it's a
yeah.
it's a good starting point. Number one, number two, and I've seen this it was a SAP and Salesforce implementation that I was
Mm,
doing at a client. They were doing this for 2 years, and they did not have a repository like list like this. Honestly, they had like 6 or 7 functional leads who were documenting processes. I mean, everybody knew what they were documenting, even amongst each other, they knew, but the list wasn't there. And they
mm,
had like 175 processes identified. One of the so when I joined as a coach to coach them on how to document, one of the first things I insisted was let's get together and list your process maps. And I tell you that list of 175 or 150 it came down literally to 75 or 80 because Mary was doing the same process that John was doing, calling it something else.
yes.
See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Or Bob was doing a component of Mary's process, sub process, right? And she didn't even know about it.
Mm-hmm.
So having a list, bringing it together is extremely helpful. Okay. The next thing I also do before I start with the big bang, whatnot, is I would establish a process governance, and that process governance starts from this process log where you identify the process owner. As I said, the process owner for the purposes that of BPM are not junior people. These are not, shop floor supervisors. These are either VPs or somewhere up there, or senior directors, senior
Mm,
people, right? So those process owners essentially become the process council. I mean, that's how I've done it. Now we can call it process council, we can call it process board, you can call it process body, whatever you want to call that. But these are a bunch of individuals across finance, operations, engineering, logistics, wherever, who meet on a regular basis. My preference or suggestion is always once a month, but if that's too much, then definitely once a quarter, because once a year is too much out. Um, so they collaborate, and again, they ensure the work methods align with strategic objectives. That's what the goal is, right? The goal is not to open up a process map once a quarter and read the process. That's not the goal. The goal is to kind of hear what's going on in the organization, what's working, what's not working. And then we have, in the previous list, as shown, a specific BPM champion assigned to the process owner, because the process owner is a very senior guy or gal, right? The BPM champion is typically a subject matter expert, but more than that, they're the ones who are updating the Visio, the process map, making sure it's contained. If they hear something that's changing in the business internally or externally, they poke the process owner tells them to go and make the change. So setting up that process council upfront is extremely important. And then the process council meetings, as I said, once a quarter or so, to observe the deviations and the KPIs. Are the KPIs, up to process KPIs up to the mark? Do we need to do some? Because if they're not up to the mark, then something is wrong with the process. You need to open up the process and see what needs to be fixed, right? And as I said, what's happening, internal, external, regulatory adjustments, technological advancements. So that digital transformation strategy I talked about, right? So that digital strategy should be part of the discussion, the process council, as to what new technologies are coming. Do we need to change our process or implement something? Those are kind of things we discuss in the process council. Current state. So once I've got the inventory in place, once I've got the process owners identified, once I've got and again, I mean, they will not, the process council is established, but there are no meetings taking place because we haven't started documenting, but the structure is in place, right? I would start with documenting current state. And the way you start is essentially, I would start with documenting how the work is currently being performed. I would identify the subject matter experts in addition to the BPM champions. I would ask for any available documentation, whether it's RACI charts or SOPs or any existing process map. Typically, people have process listed in Word document or in PowerPoints. Again, I would be mindful not to waste too much of my time reading old documentation that's done in most cases 15 to 10 years ago. That doesn't mean much, but I want to respect the organization's time and make sure that I've at least taken a chance of, and I do at times find some good nuggets from there that helps me kind of collect my thoughts. So I'm not asking very basic questions for the first time. So those are things I would do. The other thing I would do, and this is something I always insist that, so typically when I go in as a consultant, I'm a consultant. I'm not going to be there for 6 months or 1 year. I might come and go. My goal is always to make sure that after I'm gone, the BPM legacy continues, right? That vision that the chief operating officer or the CEO or CFO, whatever they had, that continues. And so it's very important for them, for me, to make sure that not just do we identify the process maps and the process owners, but we identify the BPM champions who will own that process. So what I do is then I make sure I engage them from the very beginning versus 6 months down the road when I'm about to leave the organization, if that makes sense, right? I would make sure that they engage from the very beginning. If there's Susan who's working on who's been assigned 5 processes, I would start with one. I would first train her a little bit about how to go about it. I would engage. She would co-facilitate with me, and then I would let her drive the second one, just watch. I would let her drive the third one on her own, step away, stuff like that, right? So that's the current state. Pain points and improvements, of course, as you document current state, I would encourage people to SMEs to identify the pain points, what's working, what's not working. And I try to keep it in layman terms. I really don't like throwing Lean or Six Sigma lingo in the face and making it very complicated and very sophisticated, to be completely candid with you. Because a lot of these people have never gone through an experience like this, right? And especially when you're sitting in a group of 5, 6, 10 people, um, they can be intimidated, right? If you're coming across too strong or using, you know, words straight from the Lean book or Six Sigma book. But the whole idea is to kind of use words like, what's not working, and give them some ideas. So Tim Wood is a good example in Lean, and you can Google this or find out, or I can do a class on this later. But these are ideas that you can float upfront and say, hey, in your process, if things are not moving fast, or there's too much overproduction, too much defects, or there's too much rework, these are kind of, so it'll give them ideas and it'll start pointing up, and that's what you do. As I've said before, sometimes a lot of these workshops I find are can be like, I call them organizational healing opportunities, where there's chaos going on and too much finger pointing because people don't know, where the information is coming from, or their information is going where, what kind of problem the other person is having technology wise or lack of resources wise. And when they're in the workshop sitting together, a lot of that understanding matures, a lot of healing happens. So as I'm going, so there's a lot more beyond just process documentation. And I, as a facilitator, make the most of it. I make sure that the people who are actually performing that work or will perform that future work or technology, start working well together. So I use those workshops for that. And so that's change management in my mind, right? Uh, okay, so that's kind of how I go about identifying pain points and improvements. And then finally, I talked about process risk and performance, where you essentially connect the process objectives, the KPIs, the risks and controls, and you make sure it's on the process map. So once you've identified your pain points, your improvements, your controls, you got a pretty much a future state, right? And then once you have a future state, again, you don't necessarily have to automate. But if you have to automate, then you got all kinds of options from RPA to IoT to ERP to whatnot. So as I mentioned before, that you go ahead and automate, engage the vendor, engage the system implementer, and go ahead with it. And then finally, continuous improvement, where you are always seeking to do things better. So this comes back to the culture. So now that you have your process maps documented, once you've been through a bunch of sessions, and these are typically 6 months to a 1 year kind of initiative. So a lot of people in the organization have been to the workshops. I don't want to say they've been healed, but they've kind of seen the value of speaking up. They've
Yeah.
seen the value of their points being heard. They've seen the quick wins. They're seeing the long-term wins, not just for automation, but from change management, from things getting better, from their work-life balance getting better, rather than working 14 hours a day, they're back to the 9 to 5 or 9 to 6, right? Respect, quite frankly, a lot of people feel they're respected, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
huge value proposition in this, because before, either they were not being heard, or they said something and the manager said, yeah, whatever, I don't have time to listen, or whatever. But now, because of these workshops, they're being heard, they feel respected, they're motivated. And again, as leaders, if you created mechanisms where issues can be celebrated, and I'm seeing this intently, I've heard this many times. Like, the organizations feel afraid at times to use the word issues. Call it what it is. I
Call it
kind
out.
of heard some, right? I heard it somewhere. It was one of the
Mm.
podcasts. I've never seen a client do it, but I've heard it in a podcast, and I think it was wonderful. They said there's an I can't recall which organization. There's an organization that every Friday they celebrate identifying issues. Can you imagine? Every Friday celebrate identifying issues. Now, when you build and that's culture. So when you build
Yes.
a culture where it's okay to speak up and it's okay to bring up issues and not to call it another word, a fluff word that feels good, sounds good, and issue is an issue, bring it up. I remember on my ERP implementation, my sponsor always used to tell me, Meherban, issues first, good news later. Issues first, because and it makes so much sense. And this is what I follow with all my clients. And again, I'll be mindful how I bring up the issue, of course. The last thing I want to do is they are doing firefights all day and I kind of bring more issues to them, but issues first, right? You need to bring up issues the way, and that's how continuous improvement kind of fosters and comes about. So that's pretty much it. Bringing it back to the methodology, I hope today's session was helpful, and you'll get a chance to kind of hear it and practice it. If you have questions, let me know. You can let me know now if you have any questions. We can engage later also. Chanel, are there any
Yes, I just want
thoughts?
to acknowledge Arish, or forgive me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. It's Arish. who dropped a comment with regards to the implementation of AI um, within their business. And he talks about because of the processes and functions being so dynamic, it's not easy for the engineers to continuously keep up with the changes because they're influenced by externally. And yeah, can I add to that, Meherban, if you don't mind?
Please go ahead.
I totally agree with you, and everybody wants to hop on the AI train right now when it comes to businesses. But obviously, the dynamics of your business will dictate what AI programs you need to implement. I think this is where the digital strategy plays a huge part in terms of being able to guide the specific changes. Because if you keep doing changes, without any direction, that's what it is. You just get fed up with doing changes, and then you lose track of why it was the change was needed. But if you have a digital strategy in place, regardless of your technology implementations like AI, you sort of have a guided roadmap in terms of, should we make the change now, or should we wait, because we can still process and give the outputs needed. That's something from my end, but I'd like to acknowledge that, because that's what a lot of businesses are pushing towards. They're jumping on the digital train and the AI train quite rapidly, and I'm not sure if the alignments of their digital plans are in place when doing so. Yeah.
And this is where I think, again, change management and pacing yourself is very important, right? I'll give a bad analogy, but hopefully it'll make a point. So if I can run for, let's say, 10 minutes at my age, and I also suddenly decide to run for 3 hours, what's going to happen, right? I want to run faster. I want to run more. But if I'm not capable of running that fast and that speed, something will go wrong. So as an organization, again, so this is where the depth and breadth of the organization and the connectedness comes into play, right? So when I say 10,000 people, 3 continents, or 2,000 people, one city, it doesn't matter. But this is where the leadership team, the C-suite, with their IT, their desires, their strategy, their vision, and the practical nature of execution needs to kind of line up, right? Yes, you want everything as of yesterday or today, but there are certain practicalities that are just not possible. And if you're running too fast, too long, something will break. Now, and again, that's how that's something to keep in mind. So that's kind of my comment to Arish. Hope that helps.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
No, just an add-on to the comment saying from Arish as well, that everybody wants to save money as soon as they can. That's why consultants like you guys come in and advise.
Yeah, Arish, sorry I didn't get a chance to check the shapes and stencils. I just got caught up in preparing for this deck. Next one, definitely I'll look into it. And if I find something, I'll definitely email it to you. It's very easy. I just have to kind of put my head on it for 10-15 minutes and figure it out. Okay, guys. Chanel, thank you very much for co-hosting this with me. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it.
Pleasure.
Right, we'll see you next month.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.